You're listening to Beloit Podcast.
Today's guest, Joe Accardi, brings us all sorts of Beloit history. And while much of what we'll talk about in this episode is music history, there's so many individual stories that we'll hear in this episode, so much a person could research even further. Hopefully this episode serves as an introduction to one of Beloit's many great features. Let's get a glimpse into some of our cultural and musical history. In this episode, Joe tells us about the pop house, local garage bands from the 1960s and 70s, including Joe's band, the No Left Turns. Don't forget, if you have a story to share, maybe a story similar to our guest today, if you'd like to share that story, I want to hear it. And I think our listeners do too. This is the only podcast that features Beloit's people and places, past, present, and future. And if you have a story, maybe news, an event, information you'd like to share, all you have to do is email me at thebeloitpod@gmail.com. That's thebeloit, P-O-D, @gmail.com, or contact me through Facebook. Also, remember to find out more about starting your podcast. That's right, your podcast, your very own Beloit podcast. You could start a podcast on any topic with Vivi Media, Beloit's independent media source, at vivimedia.org. That's V-I-V-I media.org. All right, let's get to one of my personal favorite topics, all-time favorite topics. That's Beloit music history with our guest, Joe Accardi. Start by giving listeners an introduction to who you are, also maybe some of your personal history in the Beloit area.
I'm a native of Beloit. I was born there at the Beloit Hospital in 1950, and I grew up attending school. I went to Beloit Catholic High School and graduated from there in 1968. During that time, I had a garage band that was popular in the immediate area. We didn't spend a lot of time on the road, going all over the Midwest. And let's see, when I graduated, the garage band lasted for about another 3 months until I went to college. I went to the University of Notre Dame, graduated from there with a degree in psychology. When I went on to graduate school, I chose library and information science, and my career spanned a number of different positions in libraries, ranging from media specialist to director of the Janesville Public Library for a few years. And I retired a few years ago from Harper College in Illinois. I was dean of learning resources there.
You're also the admin for the Facebook page, Wisconsin Garage Bands 1960s. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. I founded that a few years ago. It's been quite popular. One of the things I still enjoy doing is research. I'm pretty good at it, I think. I share the research I find on Wisconsin garage bands, some of whom I was familiar with as I was growing up in Beloit, some of whom are still my friends to this day. But it's an interesting and fun way to spend some time and use some research skills and see what other people around the state experienced during that time in the mid to late 60s when garage bands flourished. There were a number of bands in Beloit around the time my band existed. My band was the No Left Turns, and there's plenty that I've written about them on the web. If you just look up No Left Turns, Beloit, Wisconsin, I think some sites will come up. But anyway, some of the other bands that were popular around then were the Jaywalkers. A good friend of mine, who's still a good friend of mine, was in that band. In fact, I joined that band for a short period of time, and we formed an entirely new band during the summer of 1968 that was quite good, actually. And let's see, some of the other bands during that time were the Marauders. There are a couple of people in that band who still play. My cousin was in a band. One of my cousins was in the band with me, Mike Neely. He has since passed away. And one of my other cousins was in a band called the Corduroy Cloud for a time. So there was quite a rich history of garage bands around the area. Between Beloit and Janesville, there were a number of bands. There were plenty from the state line area that included Rockford and surrounding communities. So fun time.
Describe the style and sound of the garage band scene.
Well, a lot of us played the music of the day, the popular music of the day that was on top 40 radio. Everybody was listening to WLS from Chicago and WCFL from Chicago primarily. And, some of that music, of course, these garage bands, a lot of the ones from my era were the result of the Beatles coming on the scene. Prior to that, there were plenty of other bands around who were probably influenced more by people like Buddy Holly and the Crickets and bands like that. But we played some Beatles tunes, we played some Rolling Stones tunes, Monkees tunes, Rascals. There were quite a number of things. By the time we had formed a different band in the summer of 1968, we were playing some of the more psychedelic tunes from 67 and 68. We did many Cream tunes, Sunshine of Your Love and that kind of thing, and some a Vanilla Fudge song. And there were other bands who were doing that as well. We had a great time.
What were some of your personal bands that inspired you?
Well, a lot of them were playing at the Pop House at the time. There was a band that came up from Florida that made their home in Janesville, Wisconsin for a while. They were booking under an agent named Ken Adamany. Ken is still around too. He's in Madison. He's still a promoter, an event promoter. We were fortunate enough to sign on with him as our booking agent, and he had a stable of great bands. One of the best bands that was really an influence on us were the Esquires from Belvedere, Illinois. They played frequently at the Pop House. They were just an amazingly tight band that would play, I think every week they took time to learn the top 10 songs of the day, of the week. And they were just a wonderful band to listen to. They even did a cover of Nancy Sinatra's These Boots Are Made for Walking. And they had a little stage routine that they did this at the Pop House, where they had a couple of boots that were attached to some strings, and somebody on the side of the stage would pull these boots along, alternately crossing the stage toward the end of the song when the lyric, "Are you ready, boots? Start walking," would show up. Anyway, it was a great time. There were a number of other bands, some of whom I got to talk with, either then, both then, and later on, as I was writing the book about the Pop House. These are some bands from Chicago, the Crying Shames and the Mods and the New Colony Six. A couple of guys from these bands are still around, and a couple of them are still performing in the Chicago area. They were a huge influence too, and they were, again, great bands who had some recording contracts. Oh, the Buckinghams, I can't forget them. Bands like The Flock, just all sorts of bands. There were bands from Madison too that were great who played at the Pop House. So the Pop House was a big influence on me. Other bands like the Romans, they used to be Tommy Roe's backup band, but they went off on their own, and they were very good. A band called the Legends from Milwaukee, and my goodness, a band called the Robs from Milwaukee, who ended up going out to California and appeared on Dick Clark's program, Where the Action Is, and they were quite big too in the area. All of these bands were huge influences at the time.
I don't think there's been anything like the Pop House in the Beloit community since. Kind of tell us more about the Pop House, because I know there's a lot of younger generations that I think would be really interested to hear about this, and you're the guy who can really give us a history, so kind of give us as much history about the Pop House as you can.
The result of some of the research I did, I ended up putting in a book that's published by Arcadia Publishing. But it was a lot of fun doing the research because I learned a great deal of history about it while I was doing this. George Stankiewicz, who was the founder of the Pop House, he was born and raised in Beloit. He started, his parents owned a little grocery store on the corner of, near the corner of Portland and 4th Street in Beloit. George wanted to get together with some of his teenage friends in the 40s, in the early 40s when he was still in high school. He asked his father if he could use a room in the back of the grocery store as sort of a social gathering place for some of his high school friends, and his father agreed, and so George started this place back in 1943. he had it going for a while, but then he was called up for military service. So he did. He went and served his country in World War II and was a decorated veteran. But when he came back in 1946, he decided to start this up again. He, instead of just using a room in the back of the grocery store, he took over the grocery store. Eventually, it transformed from a grocery store with the room in the back to a full room that George would use as a gathering place for high school kids and for Beloit College kids. So in the mid to late 40s, it was quite a hangout. At that time, big band music was big. There weren't any live acts that played in the Pop House during that period of time, but there were a lot of record jams that George would host, and he would have friends, and he started a membership club. You had to apply for membership, and so he could keep the crowd within a reasonable size there. And they played records and they danced on weekends, and the place just got to be very popular. He started a grill service, started serving food. It was in the mid to late 50s. He hired in the first rock and roll band. They had a makeshift stage right in the building where there was a fireplace there, and there were some tables and some booths and a jukebox and some other things. But this first rock and roll band came in, Jerry Martin and the Sounds from Iowa. He had a regional hit on a local from Iowa, the Fred Lowe label. He was the first rock and roll artist to play at the Pop House. And then over the course of time, George realized that bringing in these bands was a very popular thing. He needed more room, so they expanded into a patio area outside. They started bringing in guest acts that were traveling the country. Some of Dick Clark's stable of players that he would bring around the country to do concerts in larger cities on the weekends. Some of them would stop off through the help of the booking agents that, like Ken Adamany and others, that George dealt with at the time. They would bring in acts during the week like Johnny Tillotson, Bobby Vinton, Freddie Cannon, Conway Twitty, and a whole bunch of other people that were very popular at the time. And I know this continued. George eventually had to build an even bigger music hall in order to keep up with the capacity crowds that were coming during that time. So by the mid to late 60s, when I was going there was a nice-sized ballroom, called it, with a good, nice stage at one end. There were bands from the 60s then who were becoming popular. The Kingsmen played there. They're famous for Louie Louie, of course. I saw Del Shannon there. Regionally, some national acts and a lot of local bands. Can't afford to bring in all the big names all the time. So a lot of these garage bands from other cities who were good, who had a means to be booked in places like this, they were brought in to play as well. Very talented band. It was just a great place. Now, there were also other activities in addition to music. The Pop House sponsored softball leagues, and they sponsored basketball teams. They had a great basketball team through the 40s and 50s. They would travel the country, actually, and play other teams. They even played the Harlem Globetrotters, is what I understand. The softball leagues continued every summer. There were events like the Chili Queen contest, the Chili Festival with crowning of the Chili Queen every year, and these are all documented in the book. One of the activities that continues even to this day is an annual event called the Turkey Bowl. And the Turkey Bowl is a touch softball game that's played between a couple of Beloit taverns, some folks who represent those places. And they do this on Thanksgiving morning, which is why it's called the Turkey Bowl. And it starts out with some activities at some of the local taverns or at one local tavern, and then they play the game, and then they have an activity or they have an after party at one of the other taverns in town. The memory of the Pop House is kept alive through some events like that. But that, in a nutshell, is the Pop House. There's probably a lot more that I could say about it that probably forgotten by now, or that other listeners could add.
I wanted to ask about the time it closed down. I read that was around early 70s, around, would it be 72, 73?
Yeah, it did close in 73. history, the year before that, in 1972, the state of Wisconsin made drinking alcohol legal at age 18. Now that posed a little bit of a problem because there are some high school students that turned 18, prior to graduation. The Pop House was, by that time, had become primarily a hangout for high school kids. Some of these kids, who wanted to, start going to bars, didn't go to the Pop House anymore because they could go hear music and have a drink at a tavern in town. So I think George was reluctant to convert the Pop House to an alcohol establishment. From what I was able to determine from folks and from some of the articles that I researched was he did convert it to an alcohol serving establishment, but in order to continue to serve some of the high school kids who under 18 who then would not have been able to come to the Pop House, he did have some nights that were no alcohol nights, and he had to close off that section of the building, or he had to cover up the alcohol and not serve any alcohol. But still, it didn't work. It didn't quite work out. It got to be a little too complicated to try to have no alcohol nights and alcohol nights. And George was getting to the point where he kind of wanted to retire from the business anyway. Unfortunately, that situation only lasted for about a year, and the Pop House closed in 1973 then.
Seems like there would be a demand for what the Pop House used to bring to Beloit.
Right, there is. And, another unfortunate thing is that, the cost of bringing in bands really started to go up as bands became more popular. It really is a logistical issue sometimes in order to bring bands in, have the proper equipment for them, because a lot of them don't travel with, their own PA systems anymore like we used to. They expect the venue to have a complete sound system there and somebody to run the sound and lights, and it just got to be a big expense, as the nature of that kind of entertainment changed over time. I'm not aware of what venues there are in Beloit now. I know Beloit used to have Riverfest in the 80s and 90s, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And they brought in big acts for that. I don't know why that ended. There's always a possibility of, starting up something like that or some organization collaborating with another. If there's an art festival or something, you bring in a band to play somewhere on a stage that has been set up. But again, there's a lot of preparation that needs to take place and a few logistical things with sound and that kind of thing. I think it would be a great idea to be able to bring in music acts to the Beloit area.
I wanted to ask you about your website, accardiweb.com, also some of your publications, where people can find you on the web. Give listeners an idea of where they can find your publications and tell us about your website.
I do have a website that I created a number of years ago. The URL is accardiweb.com. That's ACCARDIWEB. Accardi Web, all one word, .com. There are some links there that are dedicated to my family history. There's a couple links related to the Pop House and links to the Facebook groups that I operate, the Wisconsin Garage Band's 1960s group and the Wisconsin Concert 60s and 70s group that I administer too. There are articles there about my band, the No Left Turns, about another hangout in Janesville that lasted for about a year or so called The Meadow. Then there's a link to my blog, which I've been writing recently, a blog called Life Out of Tunes, and that URL is lifeoutoftunes.com, but there is a link from the Accardi web page, and that Life Out of Tunes is all one word too, when you put it in a URL. But anyway, the blog is just a collection of personal memoirs and other observations on the music that shaped my life. So I'm all about music. I've enjoyed music since I was a kid. I used to play little golden records, on a 78 RPM record player. I've listened to music and played music virtually my entire life. This is a collection of stories about that.
Looking at your website, one of the links I followed was the story where you came across personal history in your family. I believe it was your grandfather who did some recordings that you had found out at some point.
Yes, my grandfather passed away before I really got a chance to know him. But what I discovered later on is that my grandfather, Giuseppe Accardi, for whom I'm named, Joe Accardi, when he immigrated to this country, he wanted to assimilate, so he was called Joe Accardi as well. But anyway, he was asked to be part of the Wisconsin folk music recording project of the University of Wisconsin because he had a great voice, and he was called upon frequently to sing at Italian weddings in the area, in Beloit and in Rockford and other places. People knew about him. He got a call from somebody to set up an appointment to record some songs, and he recorded a handful of, he recorded, maybe 6 or 7 Italian folk songs, all a cappella, and they are now part of the Library of Congress American Folklore Center recording. I actually got a chance to go out to Washington, D.C. to the Library of Congress and listen to the original. The original recording was done on a platter, but they've transferred it to tape and they've transferred it to digital. Actually, you can hear these online. You can hear them off my website as well. It was quite a special feeling for me to hear my grandfather's voice at the Library of Congress.
There's so much history here, so much education and knowledge to share. I really appreciate you joining us.
Well, Reese, it's been a great pleasure for me to talk with you.
You too, Joe, and thanks again.
Thanks so much for allowing me to speak with you.
Ma voi quando è più brutta vi facete, più bella voi chi me ve presentati, e ma non saccio se ve n'accorgite. Ma queste mori bricida, tazze caffè parite, sotto vedo zucchero e un coppa parasite. Hai tanto cacciauta, io tanto cacciaggerà, io luce sotto la tazza fino a mucca da fare va. Più tempo passa e più va raffreddati, merce che vi riscarda o caffè squisito. Io bello e sapuro vigilati, si dà delizia d'un caffè granita, facendo concorrenza limonata. Ma queste mori bricida, tazze che vi parite, sotto vedo zucchero e un coppa marasite. Hai tante cacciauta, io tante cacciaggerà, io luce sotto la tazza fino a mucca da parre va. Voi siete mammarelle passatori, e i bellezzi miei per i cantare. Se voi ver divertite a cagnacori, io faccio corti pis senza denari. Bella pariglia fossi fatta amore. Ma queste mori bricida, tazze caffè parite, e sotto vedo zucchero e un coppa marasite. Hai tanto cacciauta, io tanto cacciaggerà, io luce sotto la tazza fino a mucca da parre va.
My dad made it.
Enjoy the sounds of summer and catch the thrill of knocking wood blocks over with wooden stick and making new friends from all over the United States. Join us at the second annual U.S. Cube Open sponsored by DuPont at Riverside Park in Beloit on August 5th. Teams need to be registered by 8:30 a.m. and championship finals will start around 4 p.m. Cube is spelled K-U-B-B. Hello, this is Evan Fitzgerald, 2015 U.S. National Cube Champion, and I am inviting you to join us. Cube is a fun and exciting Scandinavian long game that is gaining popularity. It can best be described as combining the skills of horseshoes and bowling, and is sometimes referred to as Viking chess. Registration is $40 and teams are made of 2 players. All ages and abilities are welcome. Even if you have never played before, you will find that players are very welcoming to teaching new players, and by the end of the day, you'll be playing like a Viking. Visit Beloit will be hosting their 4th annual Rock, Paper, Scissors tournament starting at 10:30 a.m. in the park that day. Bring out the kids and compete for fun and medals. This event is presented in support of the Visit Beloit JET Tourism Grant. You can register at CubeUnited.com. Click on the U.S. Cube Open link to register and find more details. Look for the Rules of Cube page where you will find a video of how to play and a downloadable poster explaining the rules in even more detail. Also, you can join us on Tuesday evenings at the Rock Bar and Grill in Beloit from 6:30 to 8 p.m. where we will be playing and teaching people from the community.
Come with me, I know what to do. Come with me